You've just come out of surgery. Your body still aches. The stitches still sting, but you return to the film set, the place your husband said, "Everything's fine." And there, through a small monitor, you see the man who once promised he'd never leave you kissing the very sister you once loved like your own blood. No tears, no screams, just a moment that tells you it's time to take back the ending and write it yourself. Today's story is the final chapter of that journey. The story that belongs to me. If you believe that truth can heal, even when it hurts, stay with us until the very end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Snail's story, where every story is told not to cry over what's lost, but to keep walking forward. Asterisk, the third camera was jammed at the swivel joint. Hold on a second, I said, signaling the visual assistant. Camera B just lost its focus point. Even in a hospital gown, propped up with pillows and still aching from the surgery, I insisted on being on set. Leaning back in a leather chair, I watched the wide studio room where the crew was preparing the final scene for the teaser of our new documentary, a film about survivors of flash floods in Texas. A project I'd poured my heart into for over a year. I'm Harper Kane, director and co-founder of Kane Collective, an independent documentary production house acclaimed in the industry. My husband, Colton, is the lead producer, and Riley, my foster sister, is the narrator, the public face of the film. We used to be a perfect team, or so I believed. But today, under the bright studio lights, I discovered something that ripped open every stitch in my abdomen, not because of surgery, but because of betrayal. And it all started with something small. This afternoon, I left the hospital earlier than planned, driven by a strange instinct. I told Colton I'd be resting at home, but instead, I asked our assistant director to take me straight to the studio. I lied for the first time in our marriage just because I wanted to see how things were running without me. No announcement. No formal return, just a quiet glimpse. 3 days after my liver tumor surgery, when I entered through the back door, no one saw me. The cameras were still rolling for a test shoot. And, out of habit, I scanned the internal monitor feeds, ones only the director had access to. And that's where I saw them, Colton and Riley. In the makeup room, he was seated. She stood facing him, bent slightly forward. They were whispering. Something I couldn't hear what, but I saw her smile. I saw Colton's hand on Riley's waist. Then their lips met. Not rushed, not hesitant. A soft, long kiss, like they'd kissed 1,000 times before. I couldn't look away. My hand clenched the remote like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My heart didn't race. It went quiet, as if it knew. This was the moment I would never forget. I used to kiss him like that. In the editing room, on deadline nights, when we were both high on caffeine and dim lighting. Back when Riley was just a 16-year-old tagging along backstage, begging for her first background role. I used to think of her as my real sister. I used to believe he was the kind of man who would never touch anyone close to me like that. I quietly turned away from the monitor. My heels throbbed from standing too long after surgery, but I didn't care. On the ride home, I didn't cry. I just stared out the window, past the tall buildings, past the line of cars stretching down Sunset Boulevard. I didn't ask myself why. I asked, how long has this been going on? Do they think I'd never find out? How much longer were they planning to keep up the act? When I got home, Colton had texted me. Everything went great. Riley and I will stop by the hospital tonight. Okay? Miss you. I held down the message and took a screenshot. Then I sat down, opened my personal laptop, and began writing, documenting everything I could remember the day Riley started getting more screen time. The day Colton suggested making her the host instead of a supporting role. The day he asked if she could stay with us for a few weeks because her apartment had plumbing issues. All the fragmented clues I'd once overlooked now pieced together into a horrifyingly clear picture. I couldn't tell whether the pain was greater from the betrayal or from knowing that I had unknowingly created the perfect conditions for it. That night, I called the only person I trusted besides myself, Eliza, the studio's attorney. A quiet yet razor-sharp woman who had stood by me through every licensing agreement, media lawsuit, and image rights dispute. Eliza, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if someone used company resources for personal gain, violated professional ethics, and possibly damaged the studio's reputation, what can we do? There was a moment of silence on the other end. Harper, is this about Colton and Riley? I didn't answer, but Eliza already knew. Send me everything you have. Starting tomorrow, we'll begin collecting formal documentation, and Harper. Yeah. Don't fall apart. They have no idea who they just messed with. I looked at my laptop screen. A still frame from the behind-the-scenes camera frozen at the 8th second, Colton's eyes on Riley, his hand on her cheek, their lips touching. I saved. The image named the file, evidence_01. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the white curtains, falling directly on the bed in what I used to call my safe space, a room that now felt foreign. I woke to a soft knock at the door. Then, the sound of it opening. You awake yet? Riley's voice floated in sweet and gentle, like it had been when we were kids. She stepped inside, holding a breakfast tray, her eyes gleaming with the kind of fake concern I'd seen all too clearly yesterday. Through the lens of a camera, I turned my face toward the window, feigning sleep. Yeah, I'm up. I made you oatmeal, with bananas and a bit of honey, the way you liked it back when we were editing The Shelter. I nodded, unsure whether I wanted to laugh or cry. How could she remember things like that and forget the most important boundary of all, the line between a sister and the man who belongs to her? Thanks, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Where's Colton? He ran out to the studio, something about a glitch with the teaser release. I told him I'd stay and take care of you. I let out a faint chuckle, more of a smirk than anything else. They didn't know I had already asked our assistant editor to set up a private monitoring room for me, where I could access all the raw footage and linked files. I'd seen the schedule. There were no glitches. But one thing was very clearly broken. Her honesty. Riley sat down in the chair beside the bed, gently placing her hand over mine. I'm really glad you're getting better. Truly. Our eyes met 16 years ago. My parents adopted an 8-year-old girl, Riley, after she lost her entire family in a tragic accident. I used to run barefoot with her in the garden, teach her how to read scripts, coach her on pronunciation during dubbing practice. I was the first person to believe in her acting dream when even her teachers had doubts. And now I sat here, my stomach full of stitches, my heart full of fractures. But I didn't want to cry. I wanted to understand. Why did you choose film? I asked, suddenly. She looked surprised. Because of you. I grew up watching you behind the camera, seeing how you didn't chase fame, but truth. I wanted to do that, too. I nodded slowly. I always believed you would. Riley bit her lower lip. A strange silence grew between us, like she was waiting for me to ask the one thing we both already knew. But I didn't ask, I didn't have to, because I had already seen it. After Riley left to prep for a casting call, another lie. There wasn't one scheduled today. I climbed out of bed as slowly as my body would allow. Each step tugged at the sutures in my abdomen, but it hurt less than lying still and letting others write my fate. I opened the drawer and pulled out a portable hard drive and my private laptop, the one that wasn't connected to any studio network. Inside were all the files I'd backed up last night, behind-the-scenes footage, screenshots of texts, call logs, audio clips of Riley rehearsing inappropriately emotional scenes with Colton in the edit suite. I sat there, bathed in the warm yellow light of the room, feeling an eerie emptiness settle in. The footage I was watching wasn't fiction, but it had all the makings of a tragedy: villains, betrayal, and a protagonist being pushed to the edge of trust. I thought about Colton, the man who once drove 12 hours straight to hand-deliver footage for a last-minute submission. The man who stayed up all night with me, editing our first no-budget documentaries. The man who proposed to me on the set of our very first film. I used to think he was home. Not anymore. That afternoon, Colton came back with a bouquet of white lilies, a flower I hated for its overwhelming scent and its association with funerals. He didn't remember, or didn't care, or worse, never knew. "Sorry, there were some issues at the studio," he said, placing the flowers on the bedside table. "What kind of issues?" I asked, voice calm as air. "Oh, just a lighting thing. Camera was a few frames off. Nothing major." Another lie. I looked him straight in the eye. No accusations, no anger. Just observation. "Did Riley take good care of you?" "She was wonderful." I replied, "I'm lucky to have two people who care about me." He smiled a little too forced, trying to pass as familiar. "I think once you're feeling better, we should talk about the future, about what you want to do next." I nodded. "You've been thinking about something, haven't you?" Colton hesitated for a beat. "No, just I want things to be better. For you. For all three of us." All three of us. I curled my hands beneath the blanket, hiding my reaction. Part of me felt like throwing up. The other part saw everything clearly now. They weren't planning to stop. They were just waiting for me to get strong enough to drop the so-called truth as gently as possible. That night, once both of them were asleep, I walked into Colton's office. The lock was basic, the passcode still the name of our first film together. I plugged in the hard drive. A folder titled Portland Property contained photos of an apartment, rental agreements, and plans to transfer assets to a shell company. Another Word file. Plan for after. Inside were step-by-step notes on how to talk to Harper, divide the assets peacefully, and convince her to take a break from the company. I didn't cry. I just saved everything, screenshotted every page, and sent it to Eliza at the bottom of the email. I wrote, "We're not going to talk about forgiveness. We're going to talk about justice." The morning started with the click of the espresso machine in the kitchen. I was still sitting in bed, hair unbrushed, but my mind had been wide awake for hours. Ever since I discovered plan for after the blueprint to divide up my life into manageable talking points, I hadn't truly slept. Riley and Colton were having breakfast at the kitchen island, their soft laughter slipping through the half-open door. Neither of them knew I knew. They had no idea that every snippet of conversation from "We'll take it slow to give her time to process" had been quietly recorded and backed up onto the external drive I hid beneath the bookshelf. In the study 3 days ago, I used to make films about betrayal, about victims of deception, about survivors of invisible wounds. I'd ask them what it felt like to be betrayed by the person closest to them. I don't need to ask anymore. I'm one of them. At exactly 10 a.m. I called Eliza using the encrypted number we reserve for sensitive legal cases. When she picked up, I didn't waste time. "Where do we begin?" On the other end, Eliza answered with sharp clarity, by framing them in the roles they've already chosen: violators. I sent everything I collected via secure transmission: photos, videos, emails, asset transfer plans, even the proposed equity breakdown Colton planned to offer me after his so-called honest conversation. "I need you to assess the admissibility of this evidence," I said, my voice disturbingly calm, "and protect my ownership stake in the studio." There was a pause. Then Eliza said, "I don't know how you're staying this composed." I gave a soft laugh. "I'm a director. I'm used to everything falling apart and still making sure the camera keeps rolling." That afternoon, I walked into the editing suite, Colton's usual workspace. He looked up, surprised to see me without anyone helping me. "You should be resting," he said, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You haven't been eating right the past few days." I sat down across from him. "I want to talk about Riley." He stiffened. "She's leaving the studio soon, isn't she?" I asked, straight to the point. Where'd you hear that?" He blinked, clearly on guard. "From her. She just said she might move back to Portland, take on a new ambassador role with an indie label." He exhaled. "Yeah, she mentioned it. But it's her decision. I didn't push anything." I smiled. A flat, humorless smile. "She said you're going with her." Colton froze. "I know everything," I said. "The backstage footage, the texts, the file. Even your laptop password, still the name of our first film." This time, he didn't deny it. There was nothing left to deny. "I'm sorry," he whispered, eyes dropping to the floor. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You did," I replied. "You just hoped I'd never be strong enough to find out." He opened his mouth to say more, but I raised my hand. "Listen to me, Colton. I don't need apologies. I don't need explanations. I need clarity and justice." I stood up, even though the pain pulled tight through my stomach. "In the next 48 hours, you'll receive formal notice from my legal representative. I suggest you don't delete anything. All files have been backed up and sealed as evidence."
Colton
turned pale. "You're taking this to court?" he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. "You brought your personal relationship into our business. You used shared assets to fund a private affair. You betrayed me not just as a wife, but as a partner." I started walking away, but paused at the door. "I'm a filmmaker, Colton, and in this story, oft made yourself the villain." That evening, Riley stepped into my room hesitantly. She sat in the chair across from me, folding her hands the way she used to when she'd gotten in trouble as a child. "Colton told me, you know." I said nothing. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know it would turn out like this." I tilted my head. "Then how did you think it would turn out?" "I thought maybe you'd forgive me, or at least understand, because I love him. I really do." I pressed my lips together. "Do you know how many times I've forgiven you, Riley? When you stole my script in college. When you lied about being harassed to steal a role. When you faked illness to delay a shoot." She fell silent. "But this time's different. Because this time, you didn't just touch my work, you touched my heart. You shattered the last piece of trust I had left." I opened a drawer and placed a thick envelope on the table in front of her. "This is your termination notice for breach of ethics, misappropriation of company resources, and reputational damage to the studio." Her eyes widened. "You can't do this?" "I'm my foster sister," I said. "Not my accomplice," she cried. For real this time. Not the camera-ready tears she'd learned to summon. These were the tears of someone afraid of losing, of being exposed, of not getting a second chance. But I didn't flinch. I turned away and spoke softly. "I once chose to love you like blood. Now I choose to love myself." Tuesday afternoon, I sat in Eliza's law office, on the 17th floor of a glass building, surrounded by old script prints and production contracts I once signed alongside Colton. Eliza laid 3 folders in front of me. Divorce, corporate separation, and ethical misconduct, misuse of company assets for personal gain. These 3 fronts will move forward in parallel, she said, her voice steady and sharp, like a scalpel. "And Harper, I won't sugarcoat it. It's going to get loud." I nodded. "Good. Let them know this won't be swept under the rug." Eliza gave a thin smile. "Not the kind people give when they're happy, but the kind you see from someone who's watched dozens of arrogant men think they could outsmart the law, only to be stripped bare, mask by mask, evidence by evidence. I've already brought an evaluation expert to assess the current worth of Kane Collective," she continued. Since you're a co-founder and we have clear documentation of Colton's financial and ethical violations, we can either demand full control or force a buyout on terms highly unfavorable to him. I want to keep the company, I said. He can leave with her, but this brand is mine. Eliza nodded. We'll handle the legal side, but there's another piece, media. I looked up. Do you want to handle this quietly, or do you want to go public? I was silent for a moment. Then I remembered Riley's voice from the audio recording, whispering to Colton just days ago, she won't make a big deal out of it. Harper's too classy. I looked at Eliza and said, being classy doesn't mean being silent. Back home, I got to work on my part. In the documentary world, there's something even more valuable than money: trust. No one hands over their raw, painful truths to a liar. And Colton had abused that trust. I opened my contacts list and scrolled through names. People I'd sat beside at private screenings, film festivals, storytelling workshops. One name made me pause. Rebecca Lynn, founder of the biggest indie documentary streaming platform on the West Coast. Last year, she invited me to be a guest judge for a short doc series. I sent her a short message. Do you have time tonight? I need to talk. It's about ethics in our industry. She called me back in under 5 minutes. That evening, we met in a quiet bar in Silver Lake, the kind with soft lights and live jazz, just loud enough to give our conversation privacy. Rebecca listened without interrupting, sipping her drink, her eyes never leaving mine. I didn't dramatize. I told her the truth about Colton using the company card to take Riley to Palm Springs, about the investment pitch emails that only had his and Riley's names attached, about the recording where he called me an emotional liability. Finally, I pulled out the USB drive containing plan for after, set it on the table, and said, I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for justice. Rebecca nodded, and I'm asking you to direct break the frame the accusaries were funding. I froze. She, the filmmaker we originally hired, just got caught plagiarizing. But you've lived through a story that's real enough, painful enough to understand. The people in this film, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because, for the first time in weeks, I felt like something in me still had value. 2 days later, Colton received the official court notice: divorce on grounds of infidelity and financial misconduct. Corporate separation, backed by documented proof, and a motion to freeze all production under Kane Collective's name until ownership is legally resolved. He showed up at my door at 9 p.m. that night. You're really gonna blow it all up, he said, voice shaky, a cocktail of anger and panic. I looked at him, calm to the point of cold. I'm not blowing anything up. I'm just putting everything back where it belongs. What about the contracts? You think the partners are gonna take your side after all this? I pulled out my phone and played a message I'd just received from the Morrison Film Foundation. We stand behind Ms. Harper Kane in all legal and creative decisions. We will continue our partnership with her exclusively. I looked up, and that's just the first one. That weekend, Colton and Riley showed up at an independent film council event, hoping to soft launch their new project Beyond Borders. They didn't know I'd be there to nod on the red carpet, but as the keynote speaker, I took the stage and said nothing about betrayal. Instead, I spoke about creative integrity, about how storytellers must first be honest with themselves before they claim to speak truth for others. The room erupted in applause, and them. They stood at the back of the hall like two extras who'd just been cut from the main script. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment, smaller, simpler, but finally quiet. I looked down at the rough draft of my next documentary. In her frame, a film about women who stepped out of the shadows after being betrayed by the ones they trusted most. There's no lead actress, just voices, raw and real. 1 week after filing for divorce, I got a call from Catherine Doyle, creative director at Lucent Studios, where Riley had been working remotely part-time under the title Special Collaborating Artist. "Harper, I've just been passed. Some information from an internal source." Catherine's voice was crisp, deliberate, like she was reading from a legal script. But I knew she wasn't reading. She was just being careful, the way everyone in this industry gets when they're about to brush up against a scandal. "I don't normally get involved in my employees' personal affairs," she continued. "But when those affairs start impacting professional ethics and the company's reputation, I can't look the other way." I didn't respond. My silence was enough of a confirmation. "Riley signed an ethics agreement with us," Catherine said. "She agreed not to use the company's name in any personal relationships that could influence creative partnerships, especially if there's a conflict of interest." I knew that clause. I helped draft that exact agreement when Lucent Studios was first founded 3 years ago. We're suspending our collaboration with Riley pending further review. But if you have any additional evidence, I hope you'll share it. I exhaled slowly. "Catherine, I'm not trying to destroy my sister, but I won't let her use my name to keep hurting people." That night, I posted a long entry to my personal blog, a space I once used to document behind-the-scenes notes from my film shoots. It had been a long time since I wrote there. But this post wasn't about a film. It was about a lie crafted like a film. I wasn't planning to tell this story. I thought I'd keep it in the dark, the way people hide pain to keep others comfortable. But as a documentary filmmaker, I know the truth, no matter how hard, deserves light. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. But I wrote about a betrayal from a sister who was once raised by the woman she betrayed. About a husband who used his wife's illness as cover to love someone else. About an affair disguised under the pretense of art, professional ethics, and manufactured kindness by the next morning. The post had over 2 million views. My inbox was flooded with messages from indie producers, fellow women filmmakers, and strangers who said they'd lived through the same thing. Among them was a message from Riley. Just one line: "You just ruined me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. "You did that yourself." Riley, I'm just cleaning up the set. 3 days later, I received an unexpected invitation from the Seabright Film Festival, one of the top annual gatherings for documentary filmmakers. In the U.S., it came from Joan Mercer, the festival's programming director. "Harper, I'd like to invite you to deliver the opening keynote. This year's theme is, who has the right to tell the story?" And I honestly can't think of anyone more fitting. I sat at my desk, staring at the message for a long time. Last year, Colton was the keynote speaker. I'd sat in the front row, wearing black, proud as I watched my husband speak about the power of truth in storytelling. Less than a year later, I was the one being asked to take that stage. This time, I wouldn't be in the audience. I would be on the stage, and I wouldn't be lying. Meanwhile, on a different side of the story, Colton was starting to feel the real cost of what he thought he could control. 3 major investors pulled out of his new project after his name became tied to an ethics dispute. 2 distribution platforms issued a freeze on reviewing any films under Kane Collective until legal matters were resolved. I knew this through my own network. No one called to ask questions. They called to inform. "Harper, we're standing with you." In my small home office, I stared at the wall covered in storyboards for my new documentary. In her frame, each segment was a real woman's face. Women who had been betrayed by husbands, family, or partners. Their stories were raw. Their voices unfiltered. No acting, no effects. And I would tell my story too. Not with tears, but with structure, sound, and light. Not for revenge, but to prove that anyone can rise from a fall, if they're brave enough to face the truth and stop running from the light. I sent emails to exactly 48 people, people who had worked with me, who had believed in the name Harper Kane back when it wasn't yet tied to awards or film festival speeches. Directors, screenwriters, producers, funders, cinematographers, and a few journalists I trusted not to turn this story into clickbait. The subject line was simple: screening for those who still believe in truth, no film title. No synopsis, just the location. Studio 7, the tiny screening room I once rented as an editing suite, and the time, 7 p.m. Friday. The body of the message had only one line: not every story needs actors. Some just need a camera and silence. Colton had no idea. Riley didn't either. They were still busy trying to manage the blowback from public opinion and from a film industry that had turned its back ever since. I published the blog post. They assumed that was it. A brief public airing, followed by polite retreat, where I'd preserve my dignity and let them quietly survive behind the curtain. But I'm not the kind of person who leaves a film half finished. I'm the one who cuts the final sequence, the one who locks the frame, the one who writes the credits. At exactly 7 p.m., nearly everyone arrived on time. I sat in the front row. No glam jeans, a gray turtleneck, hair pulled back, no cameras, no live stream, no MC, no colored lights, no red carpet, just a small screening room, 48 seats, gentle lighting, and a white screen waiting to come alive. I stood up and walked to the front. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I won't say much. What you're about to see isn't a film. There's no score, no actors, no post-production." I paused, took a deep breath, but it holds the truth, and sometimes that's enough. Then I returned to my seat. The lights went down. The opening clip was footage from a behind-the-scenes camera. Colton and Riley in the makeup room. The first touch, the kiss, the whispered laughter. Then came the audio, recorded in my own home. Riley's voice: "If she doesn't wake up, at least she won't have to feel the pain." Someone in the audience gripped the arms of their seat. Next came screenshots, transaction records, company funds wired to hotel bills. A message from Colton to Riley: "Harper suspects nothing. She still trusts me completely." Then a spreadsheet labeled Equity Separation Plan, Colton's intended buyout proposal, in which he would offer to purchase the company at a low valuation once Harper needs time off to emotionally recover. There was no narration, no commentary, no explanation, just images, voices, documents, the kind of silence that forces people to see, to know, to understand that not all betrayal is a knife in the back. Some of it happens right in front. A view disguised as kindness, a gentle hand on the shoulder, a caring smile, and a lie dressed as concern. When the screen faded to black, no one clapped, no one moved. The room was still, like it had just witnessed a funeral. A funeral for something everyone had once trusted, maybe trust itself. I stood. Once more, that was my story. And I shared it not to accuse, not to beg for pity, but for one reason only: to say that I chose not to stay silent. And if any of you ever find yourselves hurt the way I was, I hope you won't stay silent either. The screening ended at 8:04 p.m. At 8:07, I received a message from Joan Mercer, director of the Seabright Film Festival. "If you're willing, I'd like to screen that clip during our closing night, not for the drama, but because truth is a form of art, and you told it with dignity." Colton called just before midnight. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "You won, Harper. Congratulations." I deleted it because I didn't win. I survived, and survival isn't victory. It's the right to keep writing the rest of your story in your own hand without letting anyone else hold the pen. 1 week after the screening, the press started talking. Not because of me. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post on social media. I didn't even like a single post, but I didn't need to speak. The people who had been in that room, they became the storytellers, each in their own way. A blog post, a social media status, a quiet whisper backstage on set, and that was enough. Colton lost his role in the Morrison Network collaboration. A deal worth nearly $1 million was terminated within the week. Riley's name was removed from 2 independent film conference lineups. Lucent Studios released a formal statement, ending all collaboration with her due to a violation of professional ethics commitments. No one spelled out what happened, but everyone knew. Their careers didn't collapse from a single scandal. They peeled away piece by piece, like old paint flaking off a wall, the result of lost trust. Riley called me on a Wednesday afternoon, the first time since the screening. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail, her voice hoarse and small. "I don't have anywhere to go. I messed up. I know you don't need to hear this, Beauty. Sorry. I'm really, truly sorry." I sat quietly by the window, watching the sunset slide across the glass panes. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, because when someone's broken, you deep enough, an apology doesn't heal. It only proves they knew what they were doing. And sometimes that's enough. The next morning, I received a package by express delivery. No return address. Inside was a wedding ring, the one Colton had once taken off during a fight, then put back on with promises like "we'll grow old together." There was a small note, only one line: "We used to be a team." I didn't know if he wrote it, but I knew this: every team needs honesty, and Colton had abandoned that long ago. I placed the ring inside a small box, not to keep it, to remember. That night, I took a walk alone through the park near my apartment. No plan, no goal, just a need to breathe without carrying the weight of why me. I sat down on a bench near a little girl playing with her mom, 2 strangers, and in that soft, quiet moment, I realized I didn't need answers anymore. I just needed an ending that I chose. Not the end of a relationship, but the end of holding on the end of expecting someone else to understand my pain. The following week, the court ruling was finalized. I retained 85% ownership of the studio, full rights to the Kane Collective brand, and creative control over all ongoing projects. Colton was ordered to withdraw from all production roles and repay the funds he'd used for personal expenses, including vacations, restaurants, and hotels spent with Riley. Legally, I had one, but there was no celebration, just soft jazz playing in the editing room and me, sitting at my desk, opening the project folder for In Her Frame, the one where I'd tell the stories of women who had survived collapse, and for the first time, typed in the production notes, "This time, I'll tell mine." It took nearly 3 weeks before I could actually sit down in the edit room, that space once filled with sleepless nights shared with Colton. Our first reels, our fights, and reconciliations was now so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Every time I pressed play, I stared at the screen. A simple shot, a woman sitting alone on a wooden bench. Her face not crying, not smiling. Her voice came in. "I don't need pity. I just need to be heard. Just once, that's all." I paused the frame, muted the audio, leaned back in my chair, and whispered to myself, "I just need to be heard." 2. Just once, that's all. That afternoon, I got an unexpected call from Jonas Elliott, the cinematographer I worked with 5 years ago on Wild Roots. Jonas was the kind of guy who always stayed behind the camera, barely spoke, never showed up in crew photos, but somehow remembered every face, every glance he'd captured. Back then, we only worked together for 3 months. But once, after I broke down over budget cuts, he quietly left a Polaroid on my desk. A shot of me holding the camera, hair a mess, eyes swollen from crying but still smiling. On the back, he'd written, If you're still smiling, I'll keep rolling. The last time I saw him was at a film premiere. He came quietly, sat in the back row, and left before I even finished my speech. "Jonas," I answered, surprised. "Harper." His voice was still that same low, quiet calm I first heard in the forests of Oregon. "I know this might be weird timing, but I heard about everything, and I just wanted to say, if you need someone to shoot in her frame, I'm in." I didn't respond right away. There was a soft stirring inside me. I couldn't tell if it was emotion or hesitation. "I thought you'd moved into post-production," I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I did," he chuckled. "But I still keep my camera close, waiting for the right story to turn it back on." I looked up at the old Polaroid still pinned to the corner of the office bulletin board. Maybe it was time to turn something back on. 3 days later, Jonas showed up at the studio, same tall, quiet frame, same worn jacket, same backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked in like the 5 years hadn't happened at all. "You still keep the desk layout the same," he said with a half smile, running his hand along the edge of the wooden table. "I only changed the person sitting next to me." Jonas didn't ask anything else. We got to work like nothing had interrupted us. I opened the footage. He picked the angles, adjusted lighting, split audio channels, no long discussions, no explanations needed. Halfway through the session, he went still for a moment and asked Harper if it's okay. "Can I ask something?" I looked up. "What is it?" "Are you really okay?" Not, "Are you better?" Not, "Have you moved on?" Just, "Are you really okay?" I nodded, then shook. My head then gave a soft laugh. "I don't know. Some mornings I wake up feeling stronger than ever. Other days, I'm not sure if I'm living or just holding myself together." He didn't respond. He just looked at me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, just presence. "I don't have any advice," he said after a while. "But if you ever need someone to listen without interrupting, I'm here." In the days that followed, Jonas came by every afternoon. We edited scenes like composing a song. Sometimes we laughed at accidental outtakes. Sometimes we sat in silence after a painfully honest interview clip. And sometimes, when the work ended, we just sat side by side, saying nothing. But it was the kind of silence that comforted, not the cold stillness of betrayal, but something gentler, like a light blanket over a heart still healing. On Saturday night, after we'd finalized the opening sequence of In Her Frame, Jonas packed up his gear, then paused by the door. "Have you eaten yet?" he asked, almost shyly. I smiled. "No, but I know a little ramen spot around the corner. They've got the hottest miso broth in the city." "You lead the way," he said. And just like that, we stepped out of the studio for the first time, not because of the work, but because someone asked me to dinner. One early autumn morning, as I was color grading the final sequence of In Her Frame, the front desk called to say there was a delivery for me at the studio. I went downstairs to get it. A dark brown envelope, no return address. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. A slight tilt, the letters connected in that hurried way. It was from Colton. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on my desk, right next to the hard drive containing the rough cut of the film. There they sat, past and present, side by side, like bookends to a story that had finally reached its closing chapter. That afternoon, as sunlight slanted through the window and caught the tiny particles drifting in the air, I opened the letter. Inside was a single sheet, folded in half, handwritten, no crossouts, no edits. Harper, I don't know if you'll read this, but I'm writing because I believe I owe you something. Not redemption, not forgiveness, just the truth. I loved you, and I betrayed you. Both of those things are true. They don't cancel each other out. But they can't live in the same space. Riley, she wasn't the reason I changed. She was just the place. I ran too when I didn't have the courage to tell you that I felt small next to you. I used to admire your light, then grew afraid it would swallow me whole. If you've made it this far, maybe your hands aren't shaking when you read this anymore. And if that's true, I'm glad you deserve a life where no one holds you back. Keep telling the stories you believe in. As for me, Mabe, this time, I'll learn to listen, like a real audience should. Colt and I folded the letter, no tears, no ache, just a quiet confirmation. I had finally walked out of the place that once held me captive. That evening, Jonas showed up later than usual. He brought 2 black coffees and a small paper bag. I figured we should celebrate, he said, but we're not done yet. I know, but you finished the final scene, didn't you? I nodded. He set the bag down, pulled out a small cake. Piped across the top in white frosting were 3 words: her frame, her rules. I burst out laughing for the first time in a long time, a laugh not tangled with bitterness. You remembered that? I asked the first time you said it was back in El Paso. He grinned. Someone told you to soften the ending to make it easier for the audience. And I said, the audience doesn't need their stories spoon-fed. They need to be respected. I finished the quote for him. Jonas smiled. I remember because I recorded it. We split the cake, sweet, bitter, and just right for a final chapter that didn't fake a resolution. Afterward, I pulled up the ending of In Her Frame on the big screen. A woman in her 60s, streaks of gray in her hair, looked straight into the camera. She had been betrayed by her own son, lost her home, her reputation, but she said, I forgave him, not because I'm weak, but because I need to move forward without carrying too much weight. I froze the frame there, then turned to Jonas. What do you think about using this line as the closing? He nodded. It's perfect. Then he looked at me, not rushing, not digging, just a gentle kind of waiting. And what about you? He asked. Are you ready to move forward? I was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Maybe not far yet, but far enough to know I'm no longer standing still. Before leaving the studio that night, he turned back and said quietly, if one day you ever want to turn the camera on yourself, I'll be the one behind it. I watched him walk away. No quickened heartbeat, no confusion, just a lightness and something real. The night In Her Frame premiered. It rained lightly. Not the kind of heavy Hollywood rain directors use to heighten the drama, but a soft, breath-like drizzle. Just enough to dampen hair, to darken the hems of evening gowns. But no one complained. This time, screening wasn't held in the tiny Studio 7 editing suite. It was on the main stage of the Seabright Film Festival, where golden lights were softened through diffuse panels, and every seat had been booked. 3 days before I even locked the final cut, I entered through the side door. No red carpet, no press interviews. I didn't need to be the center. I needed to be there when my story was finally told right. At the top of the evening, the host gave a brief introduction. The film you're about to watch is not just a work of art. It is a survival. A whisper, a mirror held up 2 truths too many have feared to face. Then the lights went dark. On screen, the faces appeared. No studio lighting, no heavy makeup, just women. Of all ages, all backgrounds, telling the moment they were betrayed. But more importantly, the moment they stood back up. I had removed the voiceover narration, kept the ambient sounds wind. Traffic, the silence after truth is spoken. And the ending, exactly as I intended. The silver-haired woman gazed steady, voice low but clear. I forgave him, not because I'm weak, but because I needed to move forward without carrying too much weight. The screen faded to black dot. No music, no credits, just one line, white on black. Every frame is a choice. The room remained completely still for nearly 10 seconds after the lights came back on. Then someone clapped. Then someone else stood, and suddenly the whole auditorium rose, not with wild cheering, not with fanfare, but with a quiet recognition. This wasn't a story to pity, it was a story to respect. After the screening, several people came to shake my hand. They didn't ask, "Did Colton get sued?" They didn't ask, "Where is Riley now?" They simply said, "Thank you for telling it." I saw myself in that. I've never spoken about it until now. And in that moment, I realized the film wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever believed they were falling alone and discovered they weren't. Jonas was waiting for me in the side hallway. His shoulders were damp from the rain. A hot ginger tea in each hand. "I figured you should drink this before someone drags you into 10 more photo ops," he joked. I took the cup, my fingers brushing his. "Thank you for coming back," I said. He didn't reply, but his eyes did. They said, "You don't have to cut the film alone anymore." A few days later, a package arrived at the studio. No return name. Inside was a printed article from a film magazine. In her frame, "When Pain Becomes Art." At the bottom, a handwritten note. I saw it. "You told it better than I ever imagined. I hope you go far." No signature, but I knew it was from Riley. I wasn't angry. I didn't respond. I simply folded the article, placed it in a drawer, like a chapter finally closed. 6 months after the premiere, In Her Frame was chosen to open a touring film series at university campuses. I joined the tour for a few stops, sitting in the back row, listening as students turned to each other and asked, "Would you ever dare to tell your own story?" And I smiled, not because I'd won anything, but because I had returned to the one thing I've always wanted to do: tell stories with truth, and with the belief that even in pain, our light doesn't have to go out. I've been betrayed. I've lost everything: love, family, trust, but piece by piece, with my own hands, I've taken it all back. Maybe the strongest thing a person who's been betrayed can do is not to forgive, and not to forget, but to keep living with the truth in their heart, and without letting the past define the rest of their story. Thank you for staying with this journey until the very end. If this story touched you even for a moment, leave a comment below, because maybe, just maybe, your words will be the anchor someone else needs to make it through. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Snail Stories, where slow, honest stories always find someone who needs to hear them.